The Mistaken Diagnosis. By Fuboku Kosakai.
One night in late autumn, I paid my customary visit to Mr. Bryan, the forensic pathologist, at his home in the Bronx. I found him reading a newly published detective fiction magazine.
Detective story writers do publish the most outrageous nonsense, he said the moment he saw me.
What? What do you mean? I asked, quite taken aback.
I have just been reading a detective story by George England called Blood Type 2. A doctor in it explains a method of identifying father and child by their blood, and what he says is fantastically absurd. Listen to this. You take one drop of blood from the father and one from the child, put them into a vibrating apparatus, and mix them. If the two are truly father and child, he says, the vibrations of the minute-charged particles filling their blood will coincide. They are not electrons, after all. Did you ever hear a more ingenious theory?
I could not help laughing when I heard it.
That sounds exactly like an ancient Chinese test, I said.
What sort of test was that? He asked, suddenly serious.
There is an old Chinese work on forensic medicine called the Shi Wen Lu. It describes a blood test for parentage. Parent and child are each made to shed some blood into a vessel. If they truly are parent and child, the blood is said to clot together into one mass. If they are not, it will not mix properly.
Indeed. That is almost nearer to a scientific test. Today, after all, we judge by whether the blood cells agglutinate. He picked up the magazine again and continued in excellent spirits. Then the doctor says that human blood is divided into 4 groups and that parent and child belong to the same group. The first part is correct, but a moment's thought shows that the second cannot be. It might hold when father and mother share a blood group, but if they belong to different groups, the child's group plainly need not be the same as either parent's.
A detective writer has never handled blood in practice, of course, and merely interprets whatever he finds in books to suit himself. That is probably how such mistakes arise, I said.
Quite so. Perhaps it is more foolish to scrutinize every statement in a novel than it is to write the statement. Around 1870, if I remember correctly, a young woman in France finally chopped the stiff, needle-like bristles found on pigs, mixed them into an enemy's food, and killed the victim. The case became famous throughout Europe. The novelist James Payn then used it in his well-known novel Halves, arranging for a niece to kill one of the principal characters by chopping horsehair into his food. But horsehair cannot accomplish the purpose. Fragments of pig bristle can ulcerate the digestive tract and cause death, while horsehair is acted upon by the digestive juices and cannot produce such ulcers. Payn simply imagined that if pig hair could kill a man, horsehair would do the same, and that assumption led him astray.
I see. Yet, when one thinks about it, novelists are not alone. Even physicians, who are supposed to be specialists, must often make such errors. If the George England story deliberately portrays a doctor spouting nonsense, it might even be read as irony on the author's part, I said.
A very fair point. Doctors have always been targets for novelists and dramatists. From Aristophanes to Molière and Shaw, writers have abused them mercilessly, said Bryan, warming still further to the subject.
And in real life, doctors hold many mistaken ideas. Some years ago in Japan, a general practitioner announced a fanciful method for distinguishing self-strangulation from strangulation by another person. He then used it to give an opinion in a criminal case and even overturned the finding of a university professor of forensic medicine.
Really? What happened? Bryan asked at once.
Well, our roles are reversed tonight, and you are making me tell the stories. It was an inquiry into a death by asphyxia. The surrounding circumstances suggested that the victim had been strangled, and a professor of forensic medicine was ordered to decide whether the strangulation had been self-inflicted or done by someone else. The professor reported that no definite distinction could be made. The matter dragged on, and a local practitioner was appointed to conduct a second examination. He declared without hesitation that it was self-strangulation. His reasons were these. First, he said, in self-strangulation a person tightens the ligature weakly and does so after inhaling, therefore, pressing hard on the corpse's chest expels air. When another person strangles the victim, however, the ligature is drawn tightly and the act occurs during exhalation, so pressure on the chest produces no breath. Second, because self-strangulation occurs during inhalation, the lungs are not severely congested, strangulation by another occurs during exhalation, so the lungs are intensely congested and resemble those in pulmonary edema. Could there be a more elaborate piece of nonsense?
It surpasses the wildest detective fiction, said the quick-witted Brian. At first glance it sounds plausible, but no one who had read even a page of physiology could reach such a conclusion.
Exactly. The volume of blood in the lungs is greatest during inhalation and smaller during exhalation. Therefore the lungs could not be most congested in strangulation by another merely because he claims it occurs during exhalation. That alone makes his argument contradict itself.
Perhaps he imagined that expanding lungs drive the blood out.
Perhaps. But in any case, is it not remarkably dogmatic to claim that self-strangulation always occurs during inhalation and strangulation by another during exhalation? I said.
It is deplorable. Some men believe their personal experience to be infallible, and that doctor must have belonged to the obstinate tribe. It never occurred to him that self-strangulation can take place during exhalation, or that a person can be strangled by another during inhalation. People speak reverently of 10 or 20 years of experience, but experience is no guarantee against error.
If a man is tried on such an opinion, justice, already prone to error, is poisoned by the very scientific evidence intended to prevent error. You must have encountered examples of that kind more than once, have you not? I watched Brian's face discreetly, hoping to draw a story from him.
I have indeed, he replied with a smile. Some doctors give opinions of astonishing absurdity. You have done much of the talking tonight, so now I shall tell you about a case in which I was involved. This happened several years ago in the countryside not far from New York, Brian began.
A wealthy farmer of the district was an old man named Milton Summers. His wife had died many years before, and he lived with his only son, Harry, who was 22 at the time of the affair and had just graduated from an agricultural college. With no mother in the household, father and son were exceptionally close. An elderly woman named Mrs. Hawkins managed the home, while families of tenant farmers who worked Summers's land lived in clusters nearby. About a mile from the Summers house stood the farm of a man named Scott, who had a daughter called Edna. She was a beauty quite unexpected in that rustic place, with a fair, softly rounded face, large blue eyes, and a gentle mouth that charmed everyone who saw her. Yet she was also a thoroughly untamed country hoyden. In summer she always went barefoot. Throughout the year she never pinned up her abundant golden hair, which fell in waves over her shoulders, and her neck and arms were deeply tanned. Before long, Harry fell in love with her. He lacked the courage to tell his father. The old man was proud of his distinguished lineage and held old-fashioned views. He had always looked down upon the girl's family, and, seeing through Edna's nature, had even nicknamed her the Fury. Harry knew he would never consent to their marriage. Their love grew, however, and Harry decided that once they were married his father could no longer object. He secretly took Edna to New York and married her there. When the old man heard, he flew into a rage and refused to admit either of them to his house. The couple had no choice but to rent another man's land some distance away and support themselves. Living with her soon taught Harry that his bride deserved the nickname his father had given her. She was an ungovernable shrew, and he often found her almost impossible to manage. In time, however, a daughter was born to them, and from then on Edna became remarkably quiet. About that time Milton Summers's health suddenly began to fail, whether from age or loneliness. At last he was forced to remain in bed day and night. He finally yielded, summoned Harry and his family to live with him, placed Harry in charge of the land, and gave Edna control of the household. The old man's illness steadily worsened. When the family could no longer nurse him unaided, they hired a nurse from New York. Her name was Cora Ward, and she was very beautiful. Before long she developed an affection for Harry, who did not appear wholly indifferent. At the sight of this, Edna's old fierceness returned. Though she did not openly quarrel, she bitterly resented the nurse and pressed Harry to dismiss her at once. Since Edna's arrival, Mrs. Hawkins had been displaced from all work involving food and left only with such menial tasks as cleaning and washing. Naturally, she too came to dislike Edna. While this unpleasant atmosphere hung over the Summers household, Edna went to the cowshed one afternoon to milk a cow for supper. On returning to the house she poured the milk into a frying pan that stood over the stove. She intended to make a sauce for the meat, but for some reason changed her mind, poured the milk back into the can, and set it in the pantry to cool. That evening the sick man developed a fever and repeatedly complained of thirst. The nurse went to the kitchen for milk and conveniently found a can of it in the pantry. She carried it directly to the bedroom and gave it to the patient. After emptying the can, however, she noticed a green residue at the bottom. Alarmed, she wondered whether it might be Paris green, an arsenic powder used to kill plant pests. She took it to the room where Harry and Edna were sitting and asked them. Harry said that it looked like Paris green. Edna said nothing. At the nurse's request, the family physician was called immediately. He examined the green substance and likewise pronounced it Paris green. Soon afterward the patient's condition rapidly deteriorated, and he died toward dawn. The doctor diagnosed death from arsenic poisoning.
In those circumstances, the police sent a coroner, Brian continued. A local practitioner named Stewart, who also served as police surgeon, was ordered to perform the autopsy. His examination supposedly revealed a large quantity of an arsenic compound in the contents of the stomach. The case went to court, and an examining magistrate came out to conduct a thorough inquiry at the Summers house.
The magistrate's party questioned every member of the household and searched the premises from end to end. On a high shelf in the cowshed's equipment room, they found a cardboard box containing Paris green. The box had been torn open, some of its contents removed, and part of the powder spilled on the ground. It was clear that the box had been opened only recently. Harvest time had long passed, and there had been no need to use Paris green since spring. The investigators therefore concluded that the missing powder must have been put into the milk can. The nearby tenants could not be expected to know that Paris green was stored in the cowshed, nor were they allowed to enter it freely, so suspicion naturally fell upon the household. But which member had a motive strong enough for murder? Fortunately, dust had accumulated on the box and preserved clear fingerprints. They were photographed at once and compared with those of the household. Unexpectedly, 3 sets appeared on the box, those of Harry, Edna, and the nurse. A conspiracy among all 3 was inconceivable, so the authorities assumed that one of them was guilty. Without revealing the fingerprints, they questioned each separately, but learned nothing useful. The dead man had been highly respected, and the whole neighborhood mourned him. The sinister circumstances became the subject of endless rumor, and everyone invented a theory. People recalled the conflict between father and son over the marriage and the triangle among Harry, Edna, and the nurse. Some imagined that Harry, nursing resentment since his marriage, had poisoned his father. Others thought the wealthy man's nurse had killed him so that she might eventually marry the heir, arranging matters to cast suspicion on Edna. Still others blamed Edna's long-standing hatred of her father-in-law. At the preliminary hearing, however, it was formally decided that Milton Summers had been murdered with arsenic and that Edna was the culprit. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against her. People said that, to satisfy her vanity, she had wanted the old man out of the way so that his property would pass quickly to her husband. She was pregnant at the time, and the thought of giving birth in prison, as though branding her child at birth, caused her terrible anguish.
The attorney for young Mrs. Summers asked me to examine the case, Brian continued. He believed her innocent and suspected a fundamental error in the medical examination of the dead man. After hearing the whole story, I too concluded that everything turned on the chemical analysis of the stomach contents. If Paris green had been mixed with the milk before it was heated, green foam should have formed on the surface. Anyone would have noticed it, and no murderer would take so obvious a risk. I thought some essential point had been missed. I accepted the case and requested a fresh examination of the stomach contents. If permission was granted, I also arranged, for greater certainty, to send separate samples to 2 specialist chemists.
The attorney's request was granted, and the stomach contents were delivered to Brian. He immediately applied the arsenic mirror test and began several other analyses. He found not a large quantity, but not even the faintest trace of arsenic.
I assure you, I was astonished, he said with emphasis. The police surgeon had testified that the stomach contained a great deal of arsenic. And the family doctor was no better. Although the old man had swallowed no arsenic, he diagnosed death from arsenic poisoning. The 2 chemists obtained the same result I did. When their testimony was heard in court, the spectators' feelings changed at once to sympathy for Mrs. Summers. The jury deliberated for only 20 minutes before declaring her not guilty.
Thus, because of a physician's mistaken diagnosis, an innocent woman had nearly been tried for murder.
But how did that green substance get into the milk can? I asked after Brian had finished and we had sat silent for a while.
That is the second problem. I was asked only to determine whether the death was caused by arsenic, so I pursued the matter no further. But if this had been one of your beloved Baroness Orczy stories about the old man in the corner, an explanation would certainly be demanded. Ha, ha, ha. He laughed with evident pleasure.
Of course, the Paris green must have been put into the can after the milk was poured out. That is the most important point, is it not? I asked, hoping to hear his interpretation.
Exactly. Suspicion must naturally fall upon the nurse. The old man in the corner might even make the nurse and the family doctor accomplices. After all, the nurse's fingerprints were found on the box of Paris green.
There seem to be many mysteries in the affair, I said. Not only the nurse's fingerprints, but those of Mr. and Mrs. Summers were on the box as well. Some complicated circumstances must lie hidden behind the case.
No doubt. But we shall leave those for a detective story writer to unravel. Mr. and Mrs. Summers have made a happy home and are now living peacefully, I am told. As for the nurse, she apparently grew tired of life in New York and retired to the country. The one who drew the shortest straw was Dr. Stewart, the police surgeon. His mistaken opinion ruined his reputation, and afterward his waiting room became as deserted as a courtyard where sparrows might gather. The street outside has grown very quiet. Shall we have a cup of hot coffee?
The Japanese Mystery Library. Classic mysteries from Japan in English. Subscribe to hear the next story.